The ghost in my apartment looks like my dead boyfriend, but says he's not him. I should have known the rent was too good to be true. $600 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city? It felt like a gift. Or maybe a trap I was too desperate to see. I signed the lease without asking why the last tenant left. I didn't care. I just needed a place where no one knew me, where no one would look at me with pity in their eyes. The apartment was on the top floor of an old brick building from the 1930s. The kind of place that had character, people would say, but what it really had was peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and the persistent smell of something damp, like the walls themselves were rotting from the inside out. The windows rattled in their frames when the wind blew, and the light from the single lamp in the living room was too dim to chase away the shadows that clung to the corners. I dropped my bags and took a breath, trying to convince myself it wasn't so bad. The apartment was small but mine. The first place that was just mine since Jake died. I closed my eyes for a second, and there he was, the memory so sharp it felt like he was standing right next to me. Jake's grin, the way his brown hair fell into his eyes, the warmth of his hand in mine. I shook my head, trying to banish the image. It had been 8 months since the accident. 8 months since I buried him. 8 months of trying to hold myself together. I changed into a worn t-shirt and jeans, tossed my jacket over the back of a chair, and sat on the floor, too tired to unpack. The room was cold despite the heater sputtering weakly in the corner. I hugged my knees to my chest and stared out the window at the city lights. That night, I fell asleep on the floor with my head against my arm. And I might have stayed asleep, if not for the sound that woke me, soft footsteps across the creaky floorboards. My heart jolted, and for a second I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard it again. A quiet voice, low and familiar, whispering my name. Vanessa. I sat up, my pulse racing. The room was dark except for the weak glow of the city through the window. I reached for my phone, but my hand froze halfway. There was someone standing by the window. A figure, tall, with broad shoulders. His silhouette was outlined against the glass, and for a moment I thought, Jake. No. Impossible. Who's there? My voice came out shakier than I wanted. The figure didn't move. The streetlight outside caught his face, and my breath caught in my throat. The same strong jawline, the same curve of his mouth, the same eyes, those greenish-gray eyes I'd memorized. My Jake. But Jake was dead. I scrambled backward until my back hit the wall. My hands trembled. This isn't real, I whispered. You're not real. The man stepped closer. His face was pale in the moonlight, his expression filled with something that looked like sorrow. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no words came. Just the sound of my name again, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. Vanessa. I couldn't look away. My mind screamed at me to run, to grab my keys, to get out. But my heart ached. It ached because I wanted so badly for this to be real, for him to be real. Jake? The word slipped out before I could stop it. The man blinked, confusion flickering across his face. And then he said quietly, I'm not him. My whole body went cold. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows pressing in around me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. You look like him, I said, my voice cracking. You sound like him. I'm not him. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, as if he wasn't sure of his own words. I shook my head. I didn't understand. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this some cruel trick? A hallucination? Was I finally losing it? The man, the ghost, whatever he was, took another step forward. I could see him more clearly now. His hair, the way it curled at the ends, the scar on his chin that Jake had gotten falling off his bike when we were teenagers. It was all there. Every detail. And yet his eyes, there was something different. Something unfamiliar in the way they searched mine, like he was looking for answers too. I don't know who Jake is, he said, and the sadness in his voice made my chest hurt. But I'm not him. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to make sense of any of it. But no sense could be made. Because Jake was dead. I'd seen his body, cold and broken in that hospital bed. I'd kissed his forehead goodbye. So how was it that the man standing in front of me was him, and yet claimed not to be? The night stretched out around us, silent except for the sound of my breathing and the faint hum of the city below. And for the first time in 8 months, I didn't feel alone. I felt terrified. The overhead light flickered when I switched it on, casting long, warped shadows across the cracked walls. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold plaster, trying to steady my breath. The figure, the man, the ghost, stood a few feet away, watching me with eyes that were too familiar. Greenish-gray. Jake's eyes. But Jake was gone. I kept reminding myself of that, over and over, like it would somehow change what I was seeing. "Don't come any closer," I said, my voice low, trembling. He raised his hands slowly, as if to show he meant no harm. His movements were deliberate, almost careful, like he was afraid he might shatter the fragile tension between us. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was warm, low, the same tone Jake used when he tried to calm me after a nightmare. The same voice that once whispered promises against my skin. It made my heart twist painfully. "But you—" I shook my head. My thoughts were tangled, impossible to sort through. "You look like him. You sound like him." He crouched down a little, as if to meet my eye level without getting too close. His face, my God. Every line, every freckle, the faint scar on his chin from that bike accident. The small dimple in his left cheek when he spoke. It was Jake. And yet his eyes were filled not with recognition, but confusion, as if I was the stranger here. "I don't know you," he said quietly, his voice thick with regret, as though the words pained him as much as they did me. "I'm not who you think I am." I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers dug into the worn carpet, grounding me, keeping me from falling apart. "You're lying," I whispered. "You are Jake. You have to be—" "I swear, I'm not—" His gaze didn't waver. He seemed just as desperate for answers as I was. The lamp on the table buzzed softly. The shadows of the furniture loomed large, distorting the room, making it feel even smaller, more suffocating. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe this was a sick joke. Maybe some lookalike was playing a trick on me. But how could anyone match him so perfectly? The scar, the dimple, even the tiny mole at the edge of his jaw. No one could fake that. "Who are you then?" I demanded. My voice cracked at the end. His brow furrowed as if the question hurt. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice breaking. "I remember pieces. A house with a red door, a woman with dark hair and a blue dress, a dog, I think his name was Max. But none of it feels right. None of it feels like me." His words felt like needles, pricking at the edge of my sanity. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking slightly. "You're messing with me," I said, more to myself than to him. "This isn't happening. I'm tired, I'm grieving, I'm seeing things that aren't there." His expression softened, though the confusion in his eyes deepened. "I don't want to scare you," he said. "I don't know how I got here. I don't know why I look like him. I only know that when I saw you, I felt like I should protect you." I closed my eyes, trying to shut him out, trying to shut it out. The weight of grief was heavy enough without this, whatever this was. Hallucination, dream, ghost, madness. When I opened my eyes again, he was still there, watching me like he was afraid I'd disappear. "I buried him," I said quietly, tears blurring my vision. "I buried Jake." I stood over his grave. "So how can you be here, looking like that?" He shook his head, helpless. "I wish I knew," he said. "I wish I could tell you I was him. If it would ease your pain, I'd say it. But I don't remember you. I don't remember— Jake." The room felt colder, as if his words had sucked the remaining warmth out of the air. A part of me wanted to believe him. Another part screamed at me not to, because if he wasn't Jake, then what the hell was he? I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt, trying to pull myself together. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice firmer now. "I need time to think. I just need space." He nodded, stepping back toward the window, his figure melting into the shadows. "I don't want to hurt you," he said again softly. "I'll stay back." I watched as he retreated, his form blending with the dark corners of the room, until he was little more than a flicker of movement in the gloom. And still, my heart ached. Because no matter what he said, no matter how much he denied it, everything in me screamed that Jake was standing right there. Morning came, but it brought no comfort. The gray light filtering through the cracked blinds painted the room in cold, lifeless tones. The apartment felt even emptier in the daylight, Like whatever warmth or hope had existed here the night before had bled away with the dark. I hadn't slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. That face, Jake's face. And those eyes, searching, pleading, but hollow with confusion. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my laptop open beside me, my hands trembling as I spread out photographs in front of me like pieces of some puzzle I couldn't solve. I picked up a photo of Jake, one I'd taken on his last birthday. He was laughing at something I'd said, head tilted slightly, eyes crinkled at the corners. I knew that smile. I'd kissed it. I'd lived for it. I held the photo up, comparing it to the image burned into my mind from last night. The same jawline. The same scar on his chin. The same soft wave in his brown hair. My throat tightened. But that man, that thing said he wasn't Jake. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my gallery, finding video clips, selfies, memories that felt like they belonged to someone else now. I played one, Jake's voice filling the silent room. The way he teased, the warmth in his words. And yet, it was the same voice I'd heard whispering my name in the dark. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to think rationally. I'd always prided myself on being grounded, on not letting emotions cloud my judgment. This had to be something explainable. Sleep deprivation? Hallucination? A vivid dream fueled by months of grief? Or maybe sleep paralysis. I'd read about that. People saw figures, heard voices, felt watched. That had to be it. But deep down I didn't believe it. I stood and paced the room, arms crossed tight over my chest. The floor creaked under my bare feet, the cold seeping up from the worn boards. I glanced at the window. Outside, the sky was the same dull gray as the walls inside, as if the world reflected my mood. A movement caught my eye. I froze. There he was again, standing by the door, watching me. I sucked in a breath. You shouldn't be here. He looked as lost as I felt. His eyes darted to the mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. For the first time, I noticed his expression shift. Fear. Pure, bone-deep fear. He stared at his reflection like it was a stranger. His fingers trembled as he reached out toward it, then pulled back as if burned. I don't know who that is, he said, voice low, almost a whisper. I don't know who I am. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. But you look like him. You move like him. How is that possible? I see flashes, he said, voice strained. A fire, smoke. A woman in a red coat running toward me, crying out. A man in a uniform dragging me back. But I don't know them. I don't know those places. His gaze met mine, and for a moment, I thought he might break apart under the weight of his confusion. And God help me, I wanted to go to him. To comfort him. But I stayed where I was, nails digging into my arms, reminding myself this wasn't Jake. Couldn't be. Did Jake ever talk about a fire? I asked, my voice shaking. No. His answer was immediate, certain. Who's Jake? The way he said it, genuine, without hesitation, tore at me. How could someone wear his face, speak with his voice, and not know him? I turned away, unable to bear the sight of him anymore. My eyes burned with unshed tears. I stared at the photo still in my hand, my thumb brushing over Jake's face. This isn't real, I muttered. It can't be real. Behind me, I heard the creak of floorboards as he shifted his weight. I don't want to hurt you, he said softly. I swear, I don't know what's happening. I closed my eyes, trying to will it all away. When I opened them, he was still there. The same face, the same eyes, filled now with something that looked like sorrow. The mirror caught my attention again. His reflection wavered, distorted, like ripples on water. And for a split second, or maybe I imagined it, I thought I saw someone else in that glass. The faint outline of another man's face overlaying his, older, worn, ash-smudged and hollow-eyed. I gasped and stumbled back, my heart racing. He mirrored my movement, as if my fear fed his own. Who are you? I demanded. What do you want from me? I don't know, he said again, voice raw. I don't remember. And I realized the most terrifying part wasn't that he didn't know who I was. It was that he didn't know who he was. And neither did I. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing. The questions with no answers. The apartment felt like it was closing in on me. The air heavy with things unsaid and unseen. I had to understand what was happening. Who he was. what he was. The landlord had mentioned, almost in passing, that there was a basement storage area beneath the building. I'd brushed it off then, too focused on moving in, too numb with grief to care. But now, it felt like the only place left to look for clues. I grabbed a flashlight from my unpacked box of supplies, threw on a sweatshirt, and headed down the narrow, creaking stairs that led to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, smelling of dust, mold, and old wood. My breath came out in pale puffs as I reached the bottom. The basement was larger than I expected. Wooden shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of boxes, broken furniture, and stacks of newspapers so yellowed they looked like they might crumble to dust if I touched them. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the floor was littered with forgotten debris. I swept the beam of the flashlight around, searching for, I didn't know what, something, anything. I pulled a box off a shelf, coughing as a cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside were bundled newspapers, tied with brittle string. I untied one at random and unfolded a front page. The date leapt out at me, October 14th, 1953. The headline read, "Local hero dies in apartment fire." My heart skipped a beat. Hands shaking, I read on. The article told of a young man who had died, saving 2 children from a blaze in this very building. His name was Thomas Harper. The grainy black and white photo next to the text showed a face that made my knees weaken. It was him. The same face that haunted my apartment. The same scar on his chin. The same set of his jaw. The same eyes, even though the photo couldn't capture their color. I sank to the floor, clutching the paper. My mind reeled. Thomas. Not Jake. A man who'd died decades before I was even born. But then why? Why did he look exactly like Jake? A creak above me made me snap my head up. I wasn't alone. He stood at the top of the stairs, framed by the dim light filtering down. He looked as lost as I felt, his expression drawn tight with confusion and something deeper. Sorrow. I held up the paper. My voice wavered. Thomas Harper. Is this you? He descended the stairs slowly, his gaze fixed on the image like it might answer his questions too. When he reached me, he knelt down and studied the photo. His face went pale, paler than it already was, and his hands trembled as he touched the edge of the paper, as if it might burn him. I remember fire, he said, voice hollow. The heat, the smoke, the children crying. I tried to help, and then, nothing, just darkness, and now, this. His eyes filled with a kind of horror, as though the memories were too much to bear. I died, he whispered. I died here. I nodded, swallowing hard. You did. In 1953, the weight of it settled over both of us like a shroud. Above us, the light bulb hanging from a single cord began to flicker. The air grew colder still, so cold my breath fogged the space between us. And then, the basement seemed to come alive. A box slid from a shelf and crashed to the ground. A chair toppled over without reason. The papers around us rustled as if stirred by an unseen wind. I jumped, my heart thudding painfully. What's happening? I don't know, Thomas said, his voice strained. His hands gripped his head as if trying to hold himself together. It's like the more I remember, the less I can control it. A loud crack echoed through the basement as another shelf tilted dangerously, sending its contents spilling onto the floor. The flickering bulb gave one final sputter, and went out, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When the beam finally cut through the gloom, I saw him standing there, staring at his hands like they were foreign to him. I don't want to hurt you, he said again, that same plea in his voice. I don't know why this is happening. Neither did I. But one thing was clear, Thomas wasn't just some wandering spirit. The apartment, the fire, the memories, they were tied together. And somehow, so was I. The night pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose window panes and making the worn curtains billow like ghostly shapes. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, too exhausted to stay awake but too afraid to sleep. Because when I closed my eyes, he was there. The dreams had started a few nights ago, small fragments at first, then longer, darker, more vivid. Dreams of him, of Thomas, standing at the foot of my bed. But in the dream it wasn't his voice. It wasn't even his face, not really. It shifted, flickering between Thomas and Jake, like my mind couldn't decide who I wanted him to be. And the voice that called my name, it wasn't Thomas's soft, uncertain tone. It wasn't Jake's warm, teasing one. It was something else. Low, distant. A stranger's voice using my dead boyfriend's face like a mask. Vanessa, it would say over and over, until I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out. Tonight was no different. I woke with a start, breathless, my skin clammy with fear. The room was dark, except for the pale moonlight streaming through the window. And there he was. Thomas. He stood near the window, the silver light falling across his face, casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. The curtains swayed beside him, the wind playing at the hem of his shirt. He looked lost, haunted. I sat up, pulling the blanket around me like it could protect me from him, from the truth I was starting to see but couldn't yet accept. I can't keep doing this, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I can't keep seeing you, dreaming of you. I don't know what's real anymore. He turned, his expression pained. Neither do I. His voice, it was Jake's voice. Or so close I couldn't tell the difference. The sound of it cracked something in me, made my throat tighten with tears I refused to shed. I don't understand, I said, shaking my head. You're Thomas. I know that now. I found your name. I found your story. So why do you sound like him? Why do you feel like him? He took a hesitant step toward me. The floor creaked beneath his feet, the sound grounding me in the moment, reminding me this wasn't a dream. I don't know, he said softly. I remember things now, pieces of that night, the fire, the heat, the children, my name. But the more I remember, the less I feel like myself. I hugged my knees, my mind racing. I'd spent the day digging deeper, reading every article I could find about the fire. Thomas Harper, a hero who'd saved lives but lost his own in the process. A man mourned by neighbors and strangers alike. A man whose life ended long before mine began. And yet here he was, standing in my room, wearing my dead boyfriend's face. I don't think I can leave, he continued, his voice low, almost broken. Not until I understand. Not until I know who I really am. My heart ached for him, for the lost, fractured soul he was. But it ached more for myself, because as he stood there, the moonlight on his face, I could almost believe Jake had come back to me. And that was the cruelest part of all. I keep hearing him, Thomas said, his brow furrowing as if he was in pain. You're Jake, his words, his memories. They don't belong to me, but they're there. Like echoes I can't silence. He paused, eyes dark with confusion. Last night, I heard myself say something. It's going to be okay, Ness. I don't know why I said it, but when I did, I saw you smile. In my head, I saw it. Like I'd said it before. Like I knew you. My breath hitched. Jake had said that to me 100 times, always when I needed it most. No one else ever called me Ness. No one. You're remembering things that aren't yours, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But why? Why Jake's memories? Why my memories? He shook his head slowly. I don't know. But they feel safe. Like I'm supposed to hold on to them. Like they're the only thing keeping me here. The wind picked up outside and the room felt colder, the air charged with something I couldn't name. The curtains whipped back from the window, and for a moment it felt like the whole building might tear apart at the seams. Thomas, I said, standing now, my feet unsteady on the floorboards. What if you're not just a ghost? What if you're both? What if somehow, some way, you and Jake are connected? He looked at me, his eyes wide, the idea as terrifying to him as it was to me. Is that possible? I don't know, I admitted. None of this should be possible. And yet, here we are. We stood there in silence, the weight of what we didn't understand hanging heavy between us. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and the room plunged into shadow. And in that darkness I felt it, the pull between us, a thread of something deeper than memory or grief. A bond neither of us had asked for, but neither of us could deny. And I knew then, whatever the truth was, it wasn't done with us yet. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. It didn't feel like a place to live. It felt like a shrine, a tomb I'd built with my own hands, brick by brick, memory by memory. Jake's things were everywhere. His old sweatshirt draped over the back of a chair, worn soft from too many washes. A mug he'd loved, cracked at the rim but too precious for me to throw away. The photo of us at the beach, smiling like nothing could ever go wrong. I hadn't realized how much of him I'd surrounded myself with until now. Until Thomas. Or whatever he was. I stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle, taking it all in. The apartment was cluttered, suffocating. The objects that had once brought me comfort now felt like chains. Every corner, every shadow seemed to whisper his name. Jake, 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 and Thomas. He was always there, watching, silent, like a reflection of my grief given form. I glanced at him where he stood by the window, his face pale in the gray morning light. He looked as worn and fragile as I felt. His eyes, those two familiar eyes, tracked my movements, full of something I couldn't name. I think I'm making this worse, I said aloud, more to myself than to him. I think I'm the reason you're still here. His brows drew together. What do you mean? I hugged myself, feeling the weight of it all. I wanted to believe you were Jake, even when you told me you weren't, even when I knew you couldn't be. I wanted it so badly that maybe I don't know, maybe I'm keeping you here, feeding this connection, feeding you. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. When he opened them again, there was pain in his gaze. I feel it too, he admitted quietly. Your memories, your grief. They pull at me, shape me. There are moments I don't know where I end and he begins. He pressed a hand to his chest as if trying to steady himself. I hear his words in my head, feel his love for you. But it's not mine. It was never mine. And the more I feel it, the less I know who I really am. I sank onto the couch, the cushions cold and unforgiving. The mug with the crack sat on the table in front of me. I reached out, traced the break with my fingertip, remembering the day Jake dropped it. How we'd laughed about it. How I'd kissed him. Right there in the kitchen. Thomas sat across from me, his hands folded, his posture uncertain. Like he wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but didn't know how. I didn't mean for this to happen, I whispered. I didn't mean to trap you here. He shook his head. You didn't. Not on purpose. But I think your heart called to me, or to something. And now I'm caught between what was and what is. I met his eyes. And for the first time, I saw past Jake's face. I saw Thomas. The man beneath the borrowed features. The soul that had been lost long before I ever knew him. And in that moment, I felt something shift. A strange kind of closeness, born not of love, but of shared sorrow. Two broken people, or maybe one broken person and one broken spirit, bound together by the weight of what they'd lost. You don't have to be alone anymore, Thomas said softly. Not in here. Not in this. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. Neither do you. He smiled then. Not Jake's smile, but his own. Gentle, sad, grateful. But then his expression turned serious, his gaze heavy with meaning. Help me let go, he said, the words almost a plea. Please. Before I lose myself completely, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. How? I don't know how. Maybe start with this, he said, glancing around the room at all the relics of my grief. Let go of what's holding you here. Holding me here. I looked at the sweatshirt, the mug, the photos. At the life I'd tried so hard to keep alive, even when it was gone. And I knew he was right. The apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was a prison. For both of us. I stood, my hands trembling, and began to gather Jake's things. Each item felt like a piece of my heart, but I kept going. I put them in a box, the sweatshirt, the mug, the photos, the little trinkets I'd clung to like they could bring him back. Thomas watched in silence, his figure faint in the morning light. And as I worked, the apartment began to feel lighter, less heavy with memory, less haunted. When I was done, I looked at him. He nodded, his form already seeming to fade at the edges, like he was preparing for the release he'd asked for. Thank you, he said, for seeing me, for helping me remember, and for letting me go. I wanted to say something, to stop him, to keep him just a little longer. But I didn't, because I knew this was what we both needed. The wind outside softened. The room grew warm with the first light of day, and Thomas, or whatever part of him had lingered, began to dissolve into the sunlight, leaving only peace behind. The city was quiet in that strange in-between hour just before dawn. The stars clung stubbornly to the night sky, as if unwilling to give way to the sun. A light mist drifted through the air, softening the harsh lines of the buildings, blurring the edges of the world. I stood on the small balcony of my apartment, the cold iron railing beneath my hands grounding me, keeping me from floating away into my thoughts, or my memories. In front of me sat the box I'd filled last night with the remnants of Jake's life, or maybe the remnants of my grief. His sweatshirt, the cracked mug, the photos, the tiny souvenirs of a love I'd tried to keep alive long after it was gone. On top of it all lay the key to the apartment, glinting faintly in the moonlight. And beside that, the brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings that told the story of Thomas Harper, the man whose face wore Jake's smile, whose soul had been trapped here for so long. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. My fingers shook as I picked up the box. I stepped back inside, to the small, crumbling fireplace that hadn't seen a real fire in decades. I'd cleaned it out the night before, preparing for this. Preparing to let go. The apartment was silent, except for the soft crackle of the kindling I'd placed beneath the grate. I struck a match, watched the flame flicker to life, watched it dance along the edge of the paper until it caught. The fire spread slowly at first, then faster, consuming the clippings, licking at the edge of the photo on top of the pile. I fed the box, piece by piece, into the flames. The sweatshirt, the mug, the photos. Each item felt like a goodbye, like tearing away another layer of skin. But I kept going because I had to. Because holding on wasn't saving Jake. And it wasn't saving me. And somewhere in the corner of the room, Thomas watched. He stood in the shadows, silent, his face half hidden in the dim light. But his eyes, those endlessly sorrowful eyes, stayed fixed on me. On what I was doing. On what it meant. When the last of the box was gone, when the flames had turned the pieces of my past to ash, I turned to him. "It's done," I said, my voice rough with smoke and tears. He stepped forward, into the pale light of the dying fire. The mist from outside seemed to seep in through the cracks of the old building, curling around us both. "Thank you," he said softly. His voice was steadier than I'd ever heard it. There was peace in it now. Acceptance. And something else. Something like relief. "I'm sorry it took me so long," I whispered. He shook his head. "It took exactly as long as it needed to. We both had to be ready." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I felt the weight of all the nights I'd spent clinging to what was lost, all the mornings I'd woken, hoping for something that could never be again. Thomas took another step closer. The mist seemed to cling to him, as if reluctant to let him go. "I want you to know my name," he said. "Before I leave. I want you to know who I was." My breath hitched. In all this time, he'd never said it. I'd found it on my own, pieced it together from the fragments of the past. But hearing it from him, that was different. That made it real. "Thomas," he said, his voice soft but certain. "My name is Thomas Harper." I closed my eyes, let the name settle into my heart. A name I would remember. A man I would honor. Not for who I wanted him to be, but for who he truly was. "Goodbye, Thomas," I said, the words tasting bittersweet on my tongue. The first light of dawn crept through the window, soft and golden, spilling across the floor, touching the ashes in the fireplace, touching Thomas's face. And as the sun rose, as the night finally gave way to day, Thomas began to fade. His edges blurred, his form growing fainter with each passing moment. But he smiled, his own smile, no longer borrowed, no longer haunted. "Goodbye, Vanessa," he said. "Be free." And then he was gone. The room felt still, as if the apartment itself were holding its breath. But in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Lightness. Hope. The promise of a future not weighed down by ghosts, his or mine. I stepped out onto the balcony again, the sun warming my face, burning away the last of the mist. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could start again. The morning sun streamed through the windows, filling every corner of the apartment with a soft golden glow. The shadows that once seemed to cling to the walls like old scars had vanished, replaced by warmth and light. For the first time since I'd stepped foot in this place, it didn't feel haunted. It didn't feel heavy. It felt empty and free. I stood in the middle of the room, letting the sunlight wash over me, letting it soak into my skin as if it could cleanse me of everything I'd carried for so long. There was a strange lightness in my chest, a feeling I hadn't known in what felt like forever. It wasn't pure happiness, not yet. There was still a sadness that lingered, soft and bittersweet. But it was no longer the crushing grief that had weighed me down for months. It was something gentler, a memory, not a wound. I turned slowly, taking in the space that had been my refuge and my prison. The walls, once oppressive, now just walls. The floorboards, once groaning under the weight of my sorrow, now silent, peaceful. The fireplace, cold and empty, the ashes of the past resting quietly within it. The box I'd packed the night before was gone, reduced to soot and smoke, carried away by the morning breeze. And with it had gone so much more. The guilt, the longing, the desperate hope that I could bring Jake back by holding on to his things, by holding on to my pain. I exhaled slowly, as if I'd been holding my breath for all these months, and finally, at last, I could let it out. There was nothing left to do but leave. I walked through the apartment one last time, running my fingers over the windowsill, the doorframe, the chipped paint on the walls. I'd made this place my cocoon, my shelter from the world. But it was time to step out of it. I gathered what little I had brought that wasn't tied to Jake, packing it into a small bag. A few clothes, a book I'd been meaning to read, my journal, and that was all. The rest, the weight of the past, I left behind. When I opened the door, the hallway outside seemed brighter too. The dust motes that floated in the morning light didn't seem so heavy, so gray. I took a deep breath of the crisp air that drifted through the open windows at the end of the corridor. It smelled clean, new. I didn't look back as I closed the door. I didn't need to. I carried the memories with me, but I didn't need to see the walls that had witnessed my sorrow. They had done their part. They had held my grief, my fear, my loneliness. And now they could rest too. The stairs creaked under my feet as I descended, but the sound was no longer eerie. It was just the sound of an old building settling into itself. I stepped out onto the street, blinking against the brightness of the day. The city was waking up around me. Cars honked in the distance. People hurried by on their way to work. Children laughed as they chased each other down the sidewalk. The world kept turning, even when mine had felt like it had stopped. And now, for the first time, I felt ready to step back into it. I started walking, not really sure where I was going. I didn't have a plan, but that was okay. For so long I'd been trapped in the past, held in place by what I'd lost. Now, the future stretched out in front of me like an open road. I passed a coffee shop on the corner and hesitated, then smiled to myself. I could stop. I could sit in the sun, sip something warm, watch the world go by. I could start small. I could start over. As I crossed the street, I caught my reflection in a shop window. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. The woman who stared back at me wasn't the broken, grieving figure I'd been. She looked tired, yes, but there was a light in her eyes. A spark, the faintest glimmer of hope. And I realized that I wasn't leaving everything behind. I was carrying something forward too. The strength I'd found in facing my ghosts. The courage it took to let go. The love that would always be a part of me, even if Jake was gone. Thomas had taught me that. Or maybe I'd taught myself, through him. Either way, I was ready. The city's noise filled my ears, but it didn't drown me out. It lifted me up, reminded me that I was part of something bigger, that life was still out there, waiting. I walked on, the morning sun warm on my back, the sound of the world around me like music, and with each step I felt lighter, freer, ready for whatever came next. Because at last, I'd let go.